Hey, this is Doug Robinson. Um, I was diagnosed in May of 2024 with bladder cancer at age 74. And shortly thereafter, I was referred to the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. By the way, I've got some notes that I'm going to have to follow here because since I was the patient, I had to be told what went on because I was out of it for so long. So if you see me glancing around, I'm not trying to get antsy and get out of the chair. What happened was I was referred to Mayo in August of 2024. My son and I went over there. We had a meeting with a surgeon and jumped through their hoops on some basic things. And what we found out in having an MRI over there is that the cancer had already spread out of the bladder and into the pelvic wall. Next to that, and that made the surgeon nervous, and so he did not want to jump in and do surgery at that point in time. He preferred for that pelvic cancer to be eliminated before he went in there, for surgeon's reasons. And so that's what we did. We came back. He sent us back to Albany, and he said, "Go back to Phoebe and go back there and do immunotherapy." For a few months, and then let's check on this. And so we did that along, and every 3 months, after going and getting immunotherapy every week at the local hospital, then every 3 months I'd go back over to Mayo. He'd run another scan, run another MRI, and then he'd say, this or this. And so basically what happened was that it was working, but it was working very slowly. And so 3 more months went by, 3 more months went by. So nearly 9 months later, I had gone through 3 Mayo cycles of immunotherapy. And it was, by then, it was the end of May of 2025. Now, let me take a step back to late last fall when at Grace City we had a series of sermons from our pastors on, it was called The Big Ask. And so what the purpose of that was to try to stretch us in our prayer life. I appreciated it. I've always been a praying person, but never felt like that I was as effective as that I could be. And so what Josh was trying to help us do was to learn more about faith in prayer and to stretch our expectations in prayer. And so he asked everybody that would participate to come up with a big ask, which was a big prayer that would require more than average work in order to get that done, something that we might even be scared to pray. So mine became pretty obvious that mine was my cancer, that I wanted to get rid of that. And so I wanted a miracle, and I wanted a miracle so that the cancer would go away without me having to have this gut-wrenching surgery that was facing me at some point down the road. And so in that big ask of the Lord, then my commitment there was that I would, with whatever time I would have remaining after that surgery, that I would become the leader of my family that I had fallen short on from time to time in my life. And my family, like most, is some are saved, some are not yet. And in my case, there's what I consider my 14, which is my immediate family of sons and daughters and spouses and grandchildren, and so I pray for them regularly. But in some cases, we've got some work to do, and so I committed to jump into that with whatever time that the Lord would grant me after that. And so I went then and did what the pastors asked us to do, and that was to go back to them with our big ask and share that with them so we could get on their prayer list and get this thing going. And so that's what I did. And I went to Brent and Josh and shared with them what my big ask was. And so things rocked along. And so we continued with that immunotherapy. It got to be May of 2025. And went back then, and the surgeon told me again for like the 4th time, He said, it's just not where I want it to be. He said, but I think the window is going to be closing. He said, I feel like that these drugs that are being used, they've done about all they're going to do. And so I think we need to jump headlong in. We need to go ahead and do this surgery and get it taken care of. And he said, what I'd also like to do is that sometime earlier I had discovered that I've got a kidney that's not performing hardly at all at 7%. And so he said, what I'd like to do is while we're in there, even though your kidney is not cancerous, I'd like to remove that kidney as well while we're doing a major surgery like this. And so the surgery required removing the bladder, removing my left kidney, and then rerouting a urinary system so that you can function without a bladder. And so that was what the task was that was in front of us. And so the surgery was set for June the 16th of this year. And thankfully, I have a daughter that lives here in town and a son that lives just 100 miles away in Warner Robins. And so they committed to split the week up. I was supposed to be in the hospital about a week. And so they decided to split the week up and do half and half and come to Jacksonville and to be with me there at the hospital. And so my daughter drew the short straw, and so she ended up getting the first part of the week. And so we trucked down to Jacksonville and were ready to go on Monday morning. Had to be there at 6:30 to get this thing going. And so what happened was nothing really unusual that first day. On the 16th, we jumped in, and they tell me, again, I was under, but they tell me that this was a robotic surgery, that it went fine, that the bladder was removed, and that the kidney was removed successfully. There were also 9 lymph nodes that were taken that were going to be sent off, and double check those, specifically over there in that pelvic wall area that was a concern. And so then Amy's hanging out and she's waiting for me to come back, and it got to be that evening. The surgery was an 8-hour surgery, which was about the way it was set up to be. But as it drew longer than that, she was notified by the nurses that I was having trouble coming off of the anesthesia, and that give her a little more time, that they'd be bringing me to my room shortly. Well, shortly after that, Amy said what she heard and saw looked like a filming of ER. I had coded, she said, and so the alarm goes off for code blue, and then everybody's running around and doing their job. All the nurses, the doctors, the CPR folks, everybody was there. And so the CPR guys had to, get me breathing again. And so that was one of the first things that they obviously did. In the process of doing that, they broke 5 of my ribs and cracked my sternum. And so that made, life a little tougher over the next few months. And they also then had to go ahead and intubate me, which I couldn't even spell that, before Amy told me about what took place. But that rocked on, for a while there. And what happened is that the surgeon comes in and he talks to Amy a couple of hours later, and he says that there was some kind of internal bleed that I had, and that apparently it was over in that area where the kidney was removed, and they were having trouble trying to locate it, so they were going to do a CT scan to see if that couldn't help them find that. Again, remembering it was a robotic surgery. And so about 10 o'clock that night, the scan did pay off, and it did show them that there was an internal bleed near that area where the kidney was removed. And so they opted for an angiogram and whatever that is, and they were doing that, and said that was going to be my best case with the situation I was in, remembering that I've been in surgery, since 6:30 on that morning. And so now it's 10, 11 o'clock at night. And so they looked and looked with that angiogram, and they didn't find anything. And so the surgeon felt like that it must have clotted on its own. And he said, hooray, that's a good thing if that's what happened. So he said, I tell you what, we're going to watch him closely all night. I'm going to go home, try to get a little bit of rest. I'll be back first thing in the morning, and we'll recheck and we'll see what's happening here. And so So the nurses report in to him the next morning when the first thing when he shows up and says that they were very concerned because I'd had low blood pressure all through the night and I required some IV medication just to keep that reasonable. And so he explained that to Amy, and he said that there still is an internal bleed in there. It did not stop itself, and so we've got to find out what took place, and we're going to have to go from there. He said the only way I know to do that is do some exploratory surgery, and we're going to have to go in there. I'm just going to have to sort of rip you down the front, and off we go. Now remember, now this is Tuesday, midday now on Tuesday, and I'm still under. I mean, I don't know any of this until I was told later. But he did say that the exploratory surgery would be pretty risky, especially considering the kind of delicate condition that my body was in at that time. So they wanted to wait as long as they could before they cut me and went back in, hoping that something would change. Well, you and I know that hope's not a very good strategy, but anyhow, there was very little change up until about 4:30 in the afternoon. And so they wheeled me off to the OR and start doing exploratory surgery. After several hours, Dr. Lyon, the surgeon, comes back and says, he's finally found the bleed and he's been able to go in and surgically repair that. And so that took care of that. But the problem they had with that was that I had to have 5 units of blood because it was coming out of me about as fast as they could pump it in. And typically, when you get a blood transfusion, that blood is chilled down prior to you getting it. It's refrigerated, and they didn't even have time to warm that blood up because I was losing it so fast that I needed that blood, and they didn't even have time to warm it up. And so what happened was I started shivering, as you might expect, and they told me that I was shivering so much they couldn't even lay me still on the table. And so they finally got one of those thermal blanket, aluminum-looking tent things, and put over me and tried to help establish some semblance of body heat that was going on there. And so that's what happened on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, the nurses noticed that the signs and the vitals were improving, and that things were looking a little bit better and becoming stabilized. And so the doctors then decided they'd start slowly dialing back on the sedation. Again, remember, now it's Wednesday. I know nothing since 6:30 Monday. And that's a scary thing right there. And so the pain began to come where they had ripped me down the front and found that bleed the day before. And so I began to ask for some pain medication in my abdomen, and then of course I was beginning to have the pain from the broken ribs and the cracked sternum that was there as well. But by that time, the ICU doctor was very pleased with what he had seen in the little bit of turnaround, and so he decided to go ahead and extubate me and take the intubation tube out of me. About noon that day, I became completely conscious, and I just started chattering. I just couldn't stop talking, and of course they'd given me a bunch of drugs over that period of time, as you can imagine. So I have no idea. I'm sure my family didn't tell me everything I said. But about midday, I was completely conscious, and that when you look back on that, that's like 50 hours that I had been sedated and had been under. And I even asked the question. I just said, "What time is it?" And they told me, and I said, "Oh, on Monday?" And they said, "No, Dad, Wednesday." And I went boom, and that was just crazy. That was very hard to believe. So by then. My son Andrew had gotten down there, and so they were both in the room with me that night. And when I, being conscious, and of course I'd slept all that time being sedated, so I didn't need as much sleep. So I'm hanging out, not getting much sleep during the night. And so they began to tell me, especially Amy, some of these horror stories of what took place. And she even heard that she really got nervous when she heard the surgeon use the phrase that your dad was circling the drain. That's not a real positive. I don't think that came out of a medical book, but anyhow, when all this began to come out, I knew right then that my big ask had come through, and that the Lord had delivered me when I was that close to death. Obviously, He snatched me back and did not let death take me as close as I was to that. For the simple purpose of whatever His purposes are for me for the time that I have left, and I think I have some pretty good direction in that. At the same time, the ribs and the sternum just about overwhelmed me. Every time I would take a breath, every time I would even cough a little bit, it's just like a knife. If you've ever had that, it's like a knife being stuck in me, and that was just ugh. And so during the middle of that night, it was pretty quiet in there. I had two nurses that were assigned to me, and I started to pray, and I began to pray, and I guess I still had enough drugs in my system that I didn't think to try to be quiet, and I was praying aloud, and I was expressing my thankfulness as much as anything else as to what had taken place, even though it was kind of a rough ride getting to where I was. But I was praying loud enough that the two nurses heard me, and they came over and were thinking that I was asking them for something or whatever. And so when I told them that no, I'm just praying. I'm sorry if I'm too loud. And so once they heard that, then it wasn't too long that one at a time they began to circle back to my bed and check on me, and then would ask me a question. Well, could you give me some advice about that? And so they both individually during the night had shared with me some personal spiritual problems and some physical problems that they were having. And so we had a regular prayer meeting there with a couple of nurses, and everybody else was either not in the room or was asleep. And so that was just crazy. And then the next morning, physically, I started to respond a little better and started to come around and become more active. And the surgeon about that time makes rounds, and he comes in with a big smile on his face and a paper in his hand. And I said, "Hey, Doc, what do you got there?" And he said, "This is the final pathology report from everything that we did." And he said, there was no living cancer cells in your bladder. There was no living cancer cells in your pelvic wall. The 9 lymph nodes that we took out and we tested, all of them are negative. He said there were some cancer cells left in your body, but every one of them was dead. He said, so those 8 or 9 months of immunotherapy that you took, did the job and got things done. And so, you got to just kind of look and smile at a talented surgeon like him, and he's very talented, but I'm not so sure that he really understands who empowered him with those abilities. And even though I had already reminded him of that before we ever did the surgery, I wanted him to know that I was a believer and that there were certain things and some lines that I wasn't going to cross there. And so I just kind of smiled at him when he came in and said, well, we got to take. And I'm sure he was proud that happened. I'm sure he was happy for me as well. And of course, I was super happy because I don't know, maybe that makes a difference in me being able to live 2 more years or 4 more years or 5. I don't know. And that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that I finish the mission. Well, to wrap up, it's been 3.5 months now since the surgery. I've had some issues. I've had a no appetite issue. I ended up with a tremendous amount of weight loss. Matter of fact, I was down from the time I was diagnosed to my bottom weight was 50 pounds difference, and I'm not a big guy, so that looked pretty rough. I looked like a Holocaust survivor, just to look at me. I was just very, very thin, emaciated. And so the thing that had to happen next was you got to do the breathing test, and you got to prove that you can eat some solid food and keep it down, and you got to prove your bathroom skills all over again. So we went through all those kind of things the next couple of days. We were in there a total of 8 days when it was supposed to really be 5 to 6. But we were just thankful that we were going to go out vertically and instead of otherwise. But let me get these notes straight here. So on the 8th day, Dr. Lyon told me to pack up and go home since I no longer had cancer, and they needed my room for somebody with real problems. And so you got to love it that the surgeons got a sense of humor. So after that period of time, I came home. Family was just incredible the way they tended to me, and we worked through all the issues of having a rerouted urinary system, and you can imagine, if any of you know anything about that, how that goes. But I served my sentence with home health, and that nurse came out here every week, sometimes twice a week, and we worked through all of those issues. And so finally got a thumbs up from her, and she disappeared. And then the PT specialist that came along and was there once or twice a week finally passed his final exam and got physically where I could do some things that they wanted me to do. And so now I'm finally able, as of a few weeks ago, I'm finally able to drive again, and I have started my journey on those one-on-one spiritual conversations, starting with my grandchildren. So I'll just wind this up by saying, Lord, forgive me for ever doubting your wonder-working power that you exercised in my life. My big ask miracle was there all along. It was simply waiting for me to claim it, me and the prayer warriors with me, which I'm forever grateful for. And as Charlie Kirk, said on every campus that he went to, if you don't believe all of that, prove me wrong. Thank you.